Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My sister and I were pretty close despite our 3-year age gap. I'm the older one, and maybe that's why I felt responsible for looking out for her. When she announced her engagement last year, I was genuinely happy for her. She'd been dating this guy for 5 years, and they seemed good together. My husband runs a small transportation business. He started it about 7 years ago with just one van, and through a lot of hard work and long hours, he's built it up to having 6 vehicles now, 3 vans, and 3 cars. It's not a huge operation, but it keeps us comfortable and employs 4 drivers besides himself. The business means everything to him because he built it from nothing. So when my sister asked me to come over to help with wedding planning last Saturday, I was more than willing. I figured we'd be addressing invitations or picking out centerpieces, normal wedding stuff. She'd been stressed about the whole thing for months, wanting everything to be perfect. Her future in-laws are pretty well off, and I think she felt pressure to match their expectations. We were sitting at her kitchen table with wedding magazines spread everywhere when she suddenly looked up from her checklist and announced that she wanted to offer free transportation for all her wedding guests to make the event look classy. I thought it was a nice idea, but asked her how she planned to pull that off. She casually explained that since my husband owned a transportation business with several cars, it would be easy for him to handle everything. I felt a little warning bell go off in my head, but I tried to stay positive. I told her that my husband would be picking me up soon, and when he arrived they could talk and maybe work out a fair price for the service. She cut me off and said she didn't want to pay anything. She wanted my husband to offer the transportation completely free to all her guests. I just stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. She added that I could talk to him about it because he listens to me and would probably agree. I asked her why she wanted to promise free services to people when she wasn't the one providing them. She explained that she had invited rich friends to the wedding and wanted everything to look classy and high-end. She kept insisting that I could convince my husband to do it. She wanted my husband to basically shut down his business for a weekend, use his vehicles, his fuel, pay his drivers, and provide free transportation to 60-plus wedding guests just so she could impress people. I told her straight out that I wasn't going to convince my husband to pause his business, offer up his cars, fuel, drivers, and time all for free just so she could look good in front of her rich friends. She immediately accused me of not being supportive of her. I asked her how demanding that my husband lose money could possibly be considered supportive. She insisted it wasn't about money but about family, explaining that this was her wedding and everything needed to be perfect. She said these people were important connections for both her and her fiancé. I suggested she could pay for the service like anyone else would. She admitted that if she had to pay for it, she couldn't afford to offer it at all. But if my husband did it for free, then she could offer it and look generous to her guests. I pointed out that she wanted to look generous with someone else's money and resources. She asked why I was being so difficult and said it was just one day. I explained that running 6 vehicles for an entire day would cost hundreds of dollars just in fuel, not counting paying the drivers and the wear on the vehicles. She dismissed my concerns by saying my husband makes good money and can afford it. I told her that wasn't the point and that she couldn't just decide someone else should provide free services for her event. When I suggested she could help arrange transportation for guests who needed it at a normal rate, she said that wasn't the same thing. I agreed that it wasn't the same thing but pointed out that it would be honest. She got quiet for a while, and I thought maybe she was actually considering what I'd said. Then my husband texted that he was outside to pick me up. Before I left, my sister told me not to say anything to him about this yet because she wanted to think of another way to approach it. I told her there was no other way to approach it, and that the answer was no. When I got in the car, my husband immediately noticed I looked stressed and asked how the wedding planning had gone. I told him about my sister's request for free transportation for all her wedding guests so she could look classy in front of her rich friends. He was shocked when I explained it would be for over 60 guests and that she specifically didn't want to pay anything. He calculated that it would cost him over $1,000 and he'd have to turn away paying customers that weekend. I told him that's exactly what I had explained to her. He asked if she had offered to pay anything at all, and I explained that she had specifically said she couldn't afford to offer the service if she had to pay for it. He summed it up perfectly by asking if she wanted him to subsidize her wedding so she could impress people. The next day, my sister called to tell me she had talked to our mother about the transportation situation. She claimed that mom also thought I was being unreasonable and that family should help family. When I asked if she had told mom she wanted the service completely free, she admitted she had only told our mother that I was refusing to help with the wedding. I pointed out that wasn't what had happened and she knew it. She then revealed that she had already told 3 people about the free transportation and couldn't take it back now. I told her she better figure out how to pay for it then. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to her and hung up on me. An hour later, my mother called asking why I wouldn't help my sister with her wedding. I explained that I was happy to help, but that my sister wanted my husband to provide free transportation services that would cost him over $1,000. Mom said it was family and asked if he couldn't do something nice for his sister-in-law. I asked her if she would work for free for a weekend and pay all her own expenses just so someone else could look good. She said that was different, but when I asked how it was different, she couldn't really explain. After I explained the actual situation to my mother in detail, she went quiet. She admitted she didn't realize my sister wanted it completely free. I also mentioned that my sister had already promised the service to people without asking first, and mom agreed that wasn't smart. The wedding was still 2 months away, but my sister kept bringing up the transportation issue every few days. She tried guilt trips, got other family members involved, and even suggested my husband could write it off as advertising expense. Finally, 3 weeks before the wedding, she called with a different approach. She said she would pay for the transportation after all. I thought that was great and told her I was sure my husband would give her a fair price. Then she said she could pay $200 total. I explained that wouldn't even cover the fuel for all the transportation she wanted. She insisted it was all she could afford. I suggested she might need to scale back what she was offering, but she said she had already promised people. I told her that her promises weren't my husband's problem. She got frustrated and said she would figure something else out. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out from my cousin what my sister's solution was. She had posted on social media asking if anyone had vehicles they could donate for her wedding day to help provide free transportation for guests. The post made it sound like it was some kind of charity event. Nobody responded to her post. 1 week before the wedding, she called me crying. She said she didn't know what to do about the transportation because people were asking about it. I told her to tell them the truth and explain that she couldn't provide it. She said she couldn't because it would be too embarrassing. I asked if it would be more embarrassing than asking people to work for free. She begged me to ask my husband to do just a few trips, not all of them. When I asked if she meant at his normal rate, she reminded me she only had $200. I told her he could do $200 worth of service. She asked how many trips that would be, and I estimated probably 3 or 4 depending on the distance. She said that wasn't enough for everyone, so I suggested she choose which guests would get the service. She ended up not providing any transportation at all. On the wedding day, I heard from several guests who had been told about free transportation and were confused when it didn't happen. My sister told people there had been a last-minute issue with the transportation company. The wedding was beautiful, and everyone had a good time despite the transportation confusion. But my sister barely spoke to me the entire day. A month after the wedding, my sister finally called to apologize. She said she was sorry about the transportation situation and admitted she had been stressed about everything being perfect. I told her I understood wanting everything to be perfect, but explained that she couldn't promise things she couldn't deliver. She agreed and said she learned that the hard way. When I asked how people actually got to the wedding, she explained that most drove themselves and a few arranged carpools. Everything worked out fine in the end. I pointed out that she didn't need the free transportation service after all. She admitted she just wanted to impress people. but now realized her wedding was beautiful, without needing free transportation to make it special. She apologized again for trying to pressure my husband into working for free. For the past 3 weeks, I've been dealing with this persistent cough that just wouldn't go away. My girlfriend kept nagging me to see a doctor, and honestly, it was getting bad enough that I was waking up at night, hacking like a chain smoker. I finally caved and made an appointment with my family doctor for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. I work the night shift at a warehouse, so getting up early isn't exactly my favorite thing, but I figured I'd get it over with before heading home to sleep. The doctor's office is in one of those medical plazas where everything looks the same and smells like disinfectant. I pulled into the parking lot at 8:45, giving myself plenty of time to find the right office and deal with whatever paperwork they'd throw at me. When I walked into the waiting room at 8:50, there was already someone there. An older woman, probably in her 60s, was sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs reading a magazine. She had that look about her that screamed opinions about everything and not afraid to share them. You know the type. I walked up to the reception desk where a young woman with tired eyes was shuffling through papers. She greeted me and asked if I was there for an appointment. I told her I had a 9 o'clock with Dr. Martinez. She handed me a clipboard with forms and pointed to the sign-in sheet. When I was writing my name and appointment time, I noticed the woman before me had written 9:30 a.m. in messy handwriting next to her signature. I filled out my information, noting 9 o'clock a.m. next to my name, and took a seat across from her. The paperwork was the usual stuff: insurance information, current medications, reason for visit, emergency contact. I was halfway through listing my symptoms when I heard my name called. A nurse appeared and asked if I was there for the 9 o'clock appointment. I confirmed that was me. I stood up gathering my paperwork when the older woman suddenly perked up like a guard dog hearing an intruder. She spoke up loudly, saying she was there first and should be seen first. The nurse, a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd dealt with this before, looked at her chart and then at the sign-in sheet. She explained to the woman that my appointment was scheduled for 9 o'clock while hers was at 9:30. The older woman got more upset, insisting it wasn't fair because she'd been sitting there longer than me. She said she had things to do and that since I was young, I could wait. She claimed it was just common courtesy. I stood there feeling awkward, holding my clipboard and wondering if I should just go back to my seat to avoid the drama. But the nurse wasn't having any of it. She patiently explained that she understood the woman arrived early, but that's not how their scheduling worked. They saw patients based on appointment times, not who arrived first. If she wanted to be seen at 9, she should have scheduled a 9 o'clock appointment. The woman got even more worked up, going on about how, when she was young, people respected their elders. She said you don't make an older person wait for some kid who probably just had a hangover. I felt compelled to defend myself and mentioned that I actually had a cough that had been going on for 3 weeks. She snapped back that she didn't care what I had. She said she was there for her blood pressure medication, which was far more important than whatever was wrong with me. The receptionist had stopped what she was doing and was now watching the scene unfold. A couple other patients had trickled in and were trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word. The nurse tried again to make her understand that appointment times existed for a reason. She explained that if they saw people in the order they arrived, regardless of their scheduled time, it would be chaos. People would start showing up hours early just to get seen first. The woman threw her hands up and declared that maybe that's how it should work. She insisted that first come, first served was how real businesses operated. The receptionist chimed in, pointing out that this was a medical practice, not a deli counter. They had a system that worked for everyone when people followed it. The woman was getting redder in the face, and I could tell she wasn't used to being told no. She clutched her purse tighter and leaned forward in her chair. She demanded to speak to the office manager, calling the whole situation unacceptable. She made sure to mention that she'd been coming to this practice for 15 years. The nurse told her that the office manager would tell her the same thing they were telling her. Her appointment was at 9:30, and they'd call her when it was her turn. The woman gave up arguing but announced she was going to write a review about the place online. She said something about young people having no respect these days. She shot me a death stare and slumped back into her chair, continuing to complain about the younger generation and what's wrong with this country. I followed the nurse down the hallway, feeling her eyes burning into my back. The appointment went fine. Dr. Martinez checked me out, said I had bronchitis, and prescribed some antibiotics and cough medicine. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. When I was walking back through the waiting room to leave, I noticed the woman was still there, still waiting for her 9:30 appointment. She was now on her phone, probably calling someone to complain about the terrible service. When she saw me walking out, she made a big show of checking her watch and shaking her head dramatically. She said something about the whole situation being unbelievable. I thought about saying something, but honestly, what was the point? Here's where it gets good. When I was walking to my car, I could hear raised voices coming from inside the office. Through the window, I could see the woman standing at the reception desk, waving her arms around. Apparently, she'd missed her actual 9:30 appointment time because she was too busy being outraged about mine. A few minutes later, she came storming out of the building, phone pressed to her ear. I could hear her telling whoever was on the other end that they wouldn't see her now because they said she missed her appointment for arguing. She kept asking if they could believe that. She got in her car and sat there for a good 5 minutes, probably calling every person in her contact list to tell them about the injustice she'd suffered. Meanwhile, I was already pulling out of the parking lot, prescription in hand, ready to go home and actually get better. I'm a single dad raising my 12-year-old son after my wife passed away 3 years ago from cancer. It's been tough, but we've managed to build a good life together. My boy is quiet and respectful, the kind of kid who keeps his head down and focuses on his schoolwork. He's never been in trouble, never started fights, and always tries to help others when he can. The problem started about 2 months ago when this new kid transferred to my son's middle school. This kid was trouble from day one. He was bigger than most kids his age and seemed to enjoy picking on anyone smaller than him. My son told me about him during our usual after-school talks, mentioning how this kid would push others around during lunch and steal their food or money. At first, my son wasn't a target. He minded his own business and stayed out of the bully's way. But that changed when my son stepped in to help a smaller kid who was getting his lunch money taken. My son didn't fight or anything, just told the bully to leave the kid alone and helped the smaller boy get to a teacher. That's when the bully decided my son was his new favorite target. For weeks, this kid made my son's life miserable. He'd shove him in the hallways, knock his books down, and call him names. My son kept telling me about it, and I advised him to report it to the teachers and try to avoid confrontation. We tried the proper channels. I called the school multiple times, met with teachers, and even requested a meeting with the principal. Every time I was told they would look into it and monitor the situation, but nothing changed. If anything, it got worse because the bully figured out that my son was reporting him. The harassment became more subtle but more frequent. The kid would accidentally bump into my son hard enough to knock him down, or he'd whisper threats when teachers weren't looking. The breaking point came last Tuesday. My son was eating lunch in the cafeteria when the bully approached him with his usual group of followers. The bully grabbed my son's sandwich and threw it on the floor, then pushed my son off the bench. But this time was different. This time my son had had enough. What happened next was witnessed by about 50 kids in the cafeteria. The bully shoved my son again, harder this time, and my son finally snapped. He got up and pushed back. The bully swung first, throwing a wild punch that my son ducked. Then my son did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He threw one clean punch that caught the bully square in the nose. The bully went down hard. Blood was streaming from his nose, and he started crying immediately. Not just tearing up, but full-on sobbing like a little kid who'd just realized he wasn't as tough as he thought. He got up and ran out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a shocked silence. Within an hour, I got a call from the school asking me to come in for an emergency meeting. When I arrived at the principal's office, I found my son sitting quietly in a chair, looking worried but not scared. The principal, a woman I'd dealt with before during my complaints about the bullying, seemed nervous. The principal started explaining that she needed to discuss what happened in the cafeteria that day, saying my son was involved in a physical fight. I responded by pointing out that she meant when he finally defended himself after weeks of being bullied. The same bullying I've been reporting to them for months. That's when the door burst open, and in walked this woman who could only be described as the stereotype of every entitled parent you've ever seen. She was tall, had that manager haircut, and was practically vibrating with rage. Behind her walked the bully, his nose clearly swollen and his eyes still red from crying. Karen immediately demanded to know where the little monster was who attacked her innocent baby. She spotted my son right away and pointed at him like he was some kind of criminal. She called him a violent little thug who assaulted her son for no reason. I stood up, keeping myself between her and my son. I told the lady that her son had been bullying mine for months, and that today my boy finally stood up for himself. Karen went off about how her son would never bully anyone, and that my boy was obviously a violent troublemaker who needed to be expelled. She kept ranting about how her son was a victim and how my son was dangerous. She demanded my son be thrown out of school and threatened to call the police if they didn't take action. The principal tried to calm everyone down, but Karen wasn't having it. She kept going on and on about her perfect angel and my terrible child. Then she made her biggest mistake. She looked directly at my son and started pointing her finger at him. She called him a little piece of trash and asked how he dared hurt her baby. She said he was nothing but a worthless little brat. I told her that was enough and that she better not talk to my son like that. But Karen shot back that she'd talk to my little monster however she wanted and that someone needed to teach him some respect. And that's when she did it. This woman, this complete stranger, walked over and slapped my 12-year-old son across the face. Hard. The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot. The room went dead silent. My son's cheek turned red immediately, and I saw tears start to form in his eyes. Not from pain, but from the shock and humiliation of being struck by an adult stranger. Something inside me snapped. No one, and I mean no one, puts their hands on my child. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and threw one clean right cross that caught her square on the jaw. She dropped like a sack of potatoes, completely unconscious before she hit the floor. Her son started screaming, the principal started shouting, and my son just stared in shock. I knelt down next to my boy to make sure he was okay, while the principal frantically called for help. Within minutes, the school nurse was checking on Karen, who was slowly coming around, and the police arrived. 2 officers listened to everyone's story, including the testimonies from several students who had witnessed both the cafeteria incident and what happened in the office. The lead officer told me that I had struck this woman and that was assault. I explained that she had slapped my 12-year-old son in front of witnesses and that I was defending my child. The officer said he understood the situation but that I still couldn't just punch people. That's when the principal, who had been quiet during the police questioning, finally spoke up. She told the officer that they'd had multiple complaints about this woman's son bullying other children, including my son, and that they had documented reports going back months. Several students who had been called in as witnesses confirmed that Karen's son had been the aggressor in the cafeteria and that he had been bullying my son for weeks. They also confirmed that Karen had slapped my son first. The officer turned to Karen, who was now sitting up with an ice pack on her jaw. He told her that striking a minor was a serious offense and that she needed to come with them. Karen freaked out, asking why they were arresting her and claiming she was the victim. She insisted that I had attacked her for no reason. The officer explained that it was after she struck my child, and that was assault on a minor. I made the decision right there to press charges. This woman had not only allowed her son to bully mine for months, but had then physically assaulted my child in front of witnesses. She needed to face what was coming to her. Karen was arrested and charged with assault on a minor. Her son was suspended pending a full investigation into the bullying allegations. The school board, probably terrified of a lawsuit, finally took action and implemented the anti-bullying measures they should have had in place months ago. My son wasn't punished for defending himself, and the school finally acknowledged that they had failed to protect him. Karen's son was eventually transferred to another school after the investigation confirmed he had been systematically bullying multiple students. Karen tried to sue me for assault, but her case was thrown out when the security footage from the principal's office showed her striking my son first. She ended up pleading guilty to assaulting a minor and received community service and anger management classes. I'm 27 and just got married to my husband who's 29. We've been together for 4 years and finally decided to tie the knot. Both our families are extremely conservative and religious, the kind where you don't even say damn in front of your grandparents. When we started planning our wedding, we knew we had to navigate some tricky waters. We wanted a big celebration since we have huge extended families. 300 guests seemed reasonable, though it meant spending basically every penny we had saved. My parents contributed some money, but we were covering most of the $30,000 bill ourselves. The biggest condition from both sets of parents was absolutely no alcohol. They made it crystal clear that if there was even a single beer at our wedding, they wouldn't attend. My husband and I aren't big drinkers, but we knew a lot of our friends would appreciate having the option. Plus, we'd been to so many dry weddings in our families that felt more like church services than celebrations, but we agreed to keep the peace. The venue was this gorgeous event hall with gardens and several private side rooms. When I was doing the final walkthrough with the coordinator, I noticed one of the smaller rooms was pretty isolated from the main reception area. That's when the idea hit me. I reached out to my friend, who's a licensed bartender. He's done events before and was totally down to help. I set up what I called a VIP bar in that side room. I quietly told about 75 of our younger friends and cooler cousins about it beforehand. The deal was simple: $5 for beer, $8 for cocktails. Way cheaper than any bar they go to, and they thought the whole speakeasy thing was hilarious. The wedding day was perfect. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and the reception was beautiful. The older family members were having a great time with the music and dancing, while the younger crowd would occasionally slip away to the side room for drinks. It was discreet, fun, and nobody was getting wasted or causing problems. By the end of the night, between the drink sales and tips people gave the bartender, we'd made about $2,000. It was enough to cover a good chunk of our catering overage, which was honestly a huge relief. Everything was fine for about a week. Then my mom called me, and I could tell from her voice that something was very wrong. She told me we needed to talk right away. When I asked what was going on, she said she'd just gone off the phone with my Aunt Linda. My mom had learned some very interesting things about my wedding. My stomach dropped because I knew exactly where this was going. My mom asked me directly if I had sold alcohol at my wedding. I tried to explain, but she cut me off and demanded a yes or no answer. Did I sell alcohol after telling everyone it would be a dry wedding? I admitted that technically yes, I had, but tried to explain further. She said she couldn't believe I would lie to our entire family like this. She asked if I had any idea how embarrassed and disrespected she felt. The conversation went downhill from there. She accused me of making a mockery of our family values and being sneaky and dishonest. Then my mother-in-law called the next day. My mother-in-law told me she was very disappointed in me. She said what I did was manipulative and selfish. I tried to explain that most people didn't even know it was happening, and the people who used the bar loved it. She said that wasn't the point. I had lied to them and made them look like fools. My husband was caught in the middle. He understood why I did it, but wished I'd told him beforehand. I didn't because I knew he'd stress out and talk me out of it to avoid family drama. Linda had apparently overheard some cousins talking about the secret bar. She decided to become the family police and started calling everyone to tell them about what I'd done. When I found out she was doing this, I called her directly. I asked her why she was calling people about this when most of them didn't even know and don't care. She said it was because I had lied to all of them. I told everyone it was a dry wedding. I argued that it was a dry wedding for anyone who wanted it to be dry. Nobody was forced to drink anything. She said I was missing the point because I had deceived my family. I explained that I provided an option for people who wanted it without affecting anyone who didn't, and asked how that was deception. She insisted it was because I didn't tell them about it. This went on for weeks. Family members were taking sides. Some thought what I did was clever and harmless. Others acted like I'd committed some terrible sin. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people clutching their pearls about alcohol were perfectly fine with a gambling raffle we'd had at the reception. The breaking point came at Sunday dinner at my parents' house about a month later. Linda was there, still harping about the wedding. She said she just didn't understand how I could sit there and act like what I did was okay. I told her I was done with this conversation. She said she wasn't done and that I owed the family an apology. I asked her what for. For making sure my friends had a good time at my wedding, for finding a creative way to help pay for a $30,000 party that we threw for our families. She said it was for lying to them. I told her I didn't lie to anyone. I said it would be a dry wedding, and it was. The main reception had no alcohol. Anyone who wanted to avoid drinking could do so completely. I just provided an additional option for people who were interested. She started to argue, but I cut her off. I told her to let me finish. She wanted to talk about family values. How about the value of minding your own business? How about the value of not trying to ruin someone's marriage over something that literally didn't affect her at all? The room went quiet. My mom looked uncomfortable, but she didn't defend Linda. I pointed out the funniest part. She was so upset about alcohol being available that she'd spent more time talking about drinking in the past month than I had in the past year. Linda asked how I dared speak to her like that. I shot back asking how she dared spend weeks trying to turn my family against me over something so petty. I stood up and looked around the room. I told everyone that anyone who had a problem with how I handled my wedding was welcome to pay for their own $30,000 party and run it however they wanted. Until then, maybe they should focus on their own lives instead of mine. I walked out and my husband followed. We haven't been back to family dinner since, and honestly, it's been pretty peaceful. Most of our friends think the whole thing is ridiculous, and even some family members have quietly told us they thought the secret bar was genius. Last week I found out that Linda's daughter is planning her wedding and specifically asked me for my bartender friend's contact information. Apparently, she wants to do the exact same thing. I started in software testing right out of college with a computer science degree. I thought I'd be writing code forever, but I discovered I had a knack for breaking things in creative ways, so I ended up in quality assurance instead. There's something satisfying about finding that one edge case that nobody thought of, or catching a bug before it makes it to production and causes real problems for users. The company I was working for was pretty decent. Mid-sized software development shop that mostly built custom applications for enterprise clients. Good benefits, reasonable hours most of the time, and generally competent people. I'd been there for about 2 years when this whole mess started. I was assigned to a new project, a feature addition for one of our biggest clients. The team was your typical agile setup, a handful of developers, a scrum master to keep us organized, a product owner to make the business decisions, and me as a lone quality assurance analyst. Most of the developers were solid people who understood that finding bugs early saves everyone time and money. We had a good working relationship where they'd appreciate detailed bug reports because it made their fixes faster and more accurate. But then there was this one developer. Let's call him Karen since he acted like the male equivalent of an entitled customer. This guy had been with the company for about 3 years and apparently thought that made him untouchable. He had this attitude where his code was perfect, and any issues I found were somehow my fault for not understanding his brilliant work. The first red flag was during our initial sprint planning meeting when I introduced myself to the team. I told everyone I was the quality assurance analyst for the project and said I was looking forward to working with them. Karen immediately made a sarcastic comment about having another person to slow them down with nitpicking. The Scrum Master tried to defend the importance of quality assurance, but Karen just brushed it off saying we shouldn't go overboard with it. I should have seen the writing on the wall right there, but I figured he'd warm up once he saw I knew what I was doing. The project itself was pretty straightforward, adding a new dashboard feature to an existing enterprise application. Nothing groundbreaking, but it had to be solid because this client was paying us a lot of money and had high standards. I dove in with my usual approach: thorough testing, detailed documentation, clear steps to reproduce any issues, screenshots when helpful, and relevant log files. Most of the team appreciated this. When I'd find a bug, I'd create a ticket with everything they needed to fix it quickly. The other developers would often thank me for the detail because it saved them hours of trying to figure out what went wrong. But not Karen. Every single bug I logged against his code was met with pushback. When I found an issue where the date picker didn't validate properly on mobile devices, he claimed it wasn't a bug but user error. He said users shouldn't be doing that. I pointed out that the requirements clearly said it should work on mobile, but he argued that the requirements were wrong then. This became a pattern. No matter how clear the issue was, no matter how well documented, Karen would argue it wasn't a real bug. He'd claim users were stupid, requirements were unclear, or that I was testing it wrong. It was exhausting. When we got closer to the deadline, I was finding more issues. Nothing catastrophic, mostly cosmetic problems and minor functional bugs that would make the user experience feel sloppy. But they were all legitimate issues that should be fixed before we shipped to the client. Karen was getting more and more frustrated with each bug report. During one of our daily stand-up meetings, he finally exploded. He went on a rant about how he was sick of quality assurance logging every tiny little thing like it was the end of the world. He claimed half of the bugs weren't even real bugs. I defended myself by explaining that I only logged issues that were reproducible and against the documented requirements. But he kept arguing that they were slowing us down and we'd never make the deadline if we had to fix every cosmetic issue and minor edge case. The Scrum Master tried to say that all bugs should be evaluated and prioritized appropriately, but Karen insisted that was the problem. We were wasting time on stuff that didn't matter instead of focusing on what was actually important. The product owner had been quiet during this exchange, but I could see the wheels turning. The deadline pressure was getting to everyone, and Karen's argument was starting to sound appealing to someone who just wanted to ship the product. The product owner finally spoke up and agreed that Karen had a point. He said we needed to be more strategic about what we focused on. I knew where this was going. The product owner then announced that from now on, he only wanted critical and blocker issues logged. Everything else was just noise that was distracting us from the real work. I wanted to argue, but I also knew when to pick my battles. This was clearly a decision that had already been made in their minds. I asked for clarification about whether they wanted me to stop logging non-blocking bugs, even if they were clearly reproducible issues. The product owner confirmed that was exactly what he wanted, to focus on shipping a working product instead of getting bogged down in perfectionism. Karen smugly added that finally someone got it. I told them they had it, and I'd only log the critical stuff from now on. The relief on Karen's face was obvious. He probably thought he'd won some kind of victory. Little did he know he'd just signed his own professional death warrant. For the next 2 sprints, I did exactly what they asked. I continued testing just as thoroughly before, but I only logged the really serious stuff: crashes, data corruption, complete feature failures. Everything else, I just noted in my personal testing log and kept quiet about. It was actually kind of liberating in a twisted way. I found buttons that overlapped on mobile, making them impossible to click. I found tooltip text that was completely wrong. I found form validation that would accept obviously invalid data. I found date formats that were inconsistent between different parts of the application. I found performance issues where certain views would take forever to load. But none of it was technically blocking functionality, so I stayed quiet. The product owners seemed happy that we weren't wasting time on minor issues anymore. Karen was practically strutting around the office like he'd revolutionized software development. The release went out on schedule. Everyone patted themselves on the back for meeting the deadline. For about 2 days, it looked like their strategy had worked. Then the client started using the application. The first email came in on a Tuesday morning. The client was politely asking about some user experience inconsistencies they'd noticed. By Wednesday, the emails were getting more pointed. By Thursday, we had an emergency meeting scheduled with their entire project team. I sat in that conference room watching our product owner sweat while the client went through a laundry list of issues that made their expensive new feature look like it had been thrown together by interns. The client complained that the mobile interface was completely unusable because buttons overlapped, so you couldn't actually click on anything. The product owner nervously said he'd look into that. Then they mentioned that the help tooltips showed completely wrong information and were actually confusing their users more than helping them. The product owner said that was definitely something we needed to address. They also asked why some dates showed as mm/dd/yyyy, while others showed dd/mm/yyyy in the same screen, explaining that their international users had no idea what they were looking at. The list went on and on. Every single issue was something I had found during testing but hadn't been allowed to log. The client was professional about it, but you could tell they were questioning whether we knew what we were doing. When the client hung up, the conference room was dead silent for about 30 seconds. The product owner asked how we had missed all of this in testing. All eyes turned to me. Karen was looking particularly smug, probably expecting me to take the blame for not catching these issues. I explained that I had actually found all of these issues during testing. The product owner was shocked and asked why they weren't fixed then. I told him they were all documented in my testing notes, but per his instruction 2 sprints ago, I didn't log them because they weren't critical blockers. You could have heard a pin drop. The product owner's face went through about 5 different colors when the realization hit. The product owner asked in disbelief if I had found all of these issues but didn't report them. I confirmed that I had found them and followed the process he had established. I reminded him that he had specifically said to only log critical and blocker issues and that everything else was just noise that would slow down development. Karen tried to jump in to save face, arguing that I should have used common sense, but I cut him off and explained that I did use common sense by following the explicit instructions from the product owner about what to log and what not to log. The Scrum Master was frantically taking notes, probably already planning the post-mortem report that was going to have to be written. The fallout was swift and severe. Upper management got involved within hours. There was a formal review of our development processes. New mandatory procedures were put in place requiring all issues to be logged, regardless of severity, with proper triage happening during sprint planning rather than just suppressing bug reports. Karen tried to argue that the issues weren't really that important and that we were overreacting, but nobody was listening to him anymore. Within a month, he was quietly moved to a different team working on internal tools where his code wouldn't be seen by paying clients. A week later, I got an email from the product owner. He wrote that he owed me an apology and that my thoroughness in testing probably saved us from much bigger problems down the line. He thanked me for my professionalism in handling the situation. The client eventually got all their issues fixed, and we maintained the relationship. But it took a lot of extra work and overtime that could have been avoided if we just fixed the bugs when I first found them. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.